So welcome back, everybody. As you recall, the last class, we thought we'd be able to include the very last line of the conclusion of the third chapter in Igeres Tshuva, but we couldn't. We did know that perhaps it would not go in, kind of concluded the class, and we made it an attempt, but if you followed, you noticed it did not come in, but we didn't mention that. We will mention it this coming week before we begin Perek Dalet, of course. Not to leave this important point out, it's a small brackets, a small parenthesis, as you can see again in the end of the third chapter, which again, end of the third chapter in Igeres HaTshuva, which is the third segment of Likutei Amarim, which we merit actually to learn at this very time. We did merit to conclude, as you know, the Likutei Amarim, Sharich Lemuna, which is the second segment, and holding in the Igeres HaTshuva. Quite a few classes, though, holding just in the end of the third chapter. These prokim, each one of them, are really loaded and really giving us true insight into the whole idea of tshuva, which is the greatest gift Hashem gave mankind, particularly Am Yisrael. We did mention a few times also, particularly you could definitely say, namely, the overall tshuva, for the overall chet, famous chet, which is spoken about in so many places, which is definitely interwoven into all these chapters. We spoke about it a few times as well. All these previous classes is where you can find it on wherever you're watching it. Again, we acknowledge the hosts, which so benevolently put up the classes on a weekly basis. But the advantage, as we mentioned time and again, namely for the newcomers, the advantage of the original site, which is tanyaonline.com, that you have access to all the previous classes, which come up in the same fashion, which again on the original site, you have one of the advantages, put it this way, that the class comes up on a separate scroll, or the text comes up in a separate scroll bar, and as such easier to follow the class. But namely, all the previous classes are lined up on the left side. You can access all of them, including Likutei Amarim, Sharich Vemuno. They say Divrei Torah ani b'makom echad, ashirim b'makom sheni, ashirim b'makom echad. That ultimately every part of Tanya, even though the Alter Rebbe himself a number of times says Commission Yisbar, even over here for that matter, this is b'makom echad, this is a head, this is Igeres HaKodesh, which Alter Rebbe himself references other parts of Tanya, the entire Sefer, within these different segments, additional to having the entire Likutei Amarim, at least what we learned till now, Be'ez Hashem Yisbarach, in a good to show the entire Sefer, because this is the entire Sefer HaTanya, which has the 5 compartments, but on top of that, just there's the cross references, which the Alter Rebbe himself, you see it where he writes Commissions Bar Makamacha, or he writes exactly where he wrote it, rather what segment, what chapter. So it's always easy to access on the previous class, but mainly in the names of the previous classes from the very beginning, but namely, for example, now the Igeres HaTshuva, we're holding in the third chapter. What is Alter Rebbe saying? The first, and the second, and the third. It's all lined up again. TanyaOnline.com. And as we just mentioned, we concluded the third chapter, but there's one little brackets which we started explaining, but like I say, didn't make it in, so we're going to just start today's class with this small parenthesis, but so loaded, and Alter Rebbe so beautifully translates a pasuk, Chazdei Hashem Kilei, this pasuk, this verse, Chazdei Hashem Kilei Samnu. The kindness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because we are incomplete. Ein onu tmimim, in the lashon of the Alter Rebbe. So on the surface, we say Chazdei Hashem Kilei Samnu. What is it? What comes to mind? And this is one of the pirushim as well. One of the explanations that the kindness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu are never complete. Meaning to say, you will always have more and more kindness. And it reminds us, of course, of the 3 times a day when we say Maidim, this recitation, which we say in Maidim, you're good, your compassion did not end. And because your kindness did not complete itself. I mean, it's like Hashem has always extended kindness and always extends benevolence without any completion. It means there's no stop and say, okay, we're done with that. No, which is really predicated on this very pasuk. Chaz de Hashem kilei samnu. That Hashem's kindness are never complete. The Alter Rebbe says, what's that nun doing there? Grammatically, it should have been without the nun. And actually, as we say it in Maidim, Chaz kilei emrachim kilei samu chasadecho v'hamrachim loshin ufleisecha v'tirusecha b'chol yom erev aveikim v'tzarayim atev kilei chol rachamecho and then hamrachim kilei samu chasadecho. That it's never finished. It means they never completed in the context of finish. It's never finished. You always extend your kindness without any stop, without any break on it. It's always expressed. Kilei samu chasadecho. So that makes sense in context, and we're trying to point out Hashem's infinite kindness, infinite benevolence. So what's the nun doing in the pasuk? In other words, based on this explanation, interpretation, it should have been said, Chaz de Hashem kilei samu. And again, it's way that Chiknes Sagdela, put it into the Maidim, kilei samu chasadecho. What's the nun there? Kilei samnu, asks the Alter Rebbe. Again, this is b'makim acher. This is ahead of what we're learning. Igeres HaKodesh, which is the 10th Igeres HaKodesh, a famous Igeres HaKodesh, very fundamental, extremely fundamental. I encourage you, till we get there, Bez Hashem, one to look at it, to find it on their own, easy access to it, wherever you could find the Tanya, which is again the entire Sefer. There's easy access to the Sefer online, or if you have a Tanya, and most of you do have a Tanya at home, how can you not have a Tanya in your home? Can't you not have a Tanya in your home? Of course you have a Tanya. Many of you have it. Would like to believe most of you have a Tanya in your home. So in the Igeres HaKodesh, or you can find it online, as we know, in Igeres HaKodesh, chapter 10, Perik Yud, Alter Rebbe begins the chapter basically explaining this pasuk, Chaz de Hashem kilei samnu, and begins with a question. Why is it kilei samnu instead of kilei samu? So the Alter Rebbe explains in length the whole setup of Torah mitzvahs, the way Hashem established Torah mitzvahs, and then he goes on that there is the idea of tshuva. Mima makim krosich Hashem, Hashem Yid calls HaKadosh Baruch Hu from the depth of his heart, which he opens up the reservoir of these resources which usually don't come into play in normal times. And what he does with that is he fills in all the cavities which were lacking as per not complying, namely the way the Yid is meant to comply with the mitzvahs, say the positive mitzvahs. And again, this is all based on Alter Rebbe himself. In the beginning, the first page of Igeres HaTshuva, right away you see it, right? With Igeres HaTshuva, the first page, Alter Rebbe speaks about the mitzvah, say how careful we have to be in a positive mitzvah when it comes to positive mitzvahs in general, in Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam. Because even though, by definition, categorically, the positive mitzvah is less grave than the negative one has to wait till Yom Kippur to be completely clean, completely cleansed. And though it's a Lashon Tailin, it's pendant. And you have to wait till Yom Kippur to uproot the stain when it comes to mitzvah. Say, that a person doesn't budge from the area where he does tshuva. The moment he does tshuva, Hashem already atones for him. Yet we see mitzvah say override and mitzvah leisasa. And why so? Again, you can see it in the first chapter of Igeres HaTshuva. It's worthwhile to take note. It's the first page, for that matter, in the Igeres HaTshuva. It's a long parenthesis, but very fundamental. And he says, why would a mitzvah say override a leisasa according to Torah? So Alter Rebbe explains. True, when it comes to leisasa, you have to wait till after Yom Kippur in order for the sin to be cleansed. When it comes to mitzvah say, they don't budge from there till you're atoned. which again, we know in general, again, based on this information also, that the mitzvah's loisasa is more grave as such. But nonetheless, when you don't do a mitzvah saseh, the ayr that you have to be mamshich, this light, this energy that was incumbent upon you to draw onto your neshama and ultimately into the world and so on, is gone, and is gone forever, if you will. Because, as the Rebbe brings the Gemara, Chazal tell us that someone, for example, didn't read Krishma. It's a uvas she'en yachal iskein. It's a penalty. It's a sin that one cannot correct, because I'm going to start saying Shema every day for the rest of my life. The Larichas Yamim B'Shamim Teves from tonight. If I missed out Krishma at night or Krishma by day, I'm never going to fail. I'm never going to miss Zman Krishma. Okay, but what happened to that Monday, as an example? That Ayr, that light, which needed to connect to your neshama and ultimately via your neshama out into society, into Chel Kebelim, your lot in this world, and ultimately into the world in general, which is again in combined with the general objective of creation. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted Adira B'Tachteinu, he wanted his light to penetrate. And again, not just stam light, but a very organized light, organized system of light rather, established through Torah and mitzvahs. And every mitzvah is precisely established in the right exact time and moment when Hashem decided in his system that light has to come and connect with your neshama, and ultimately through your neshama to chelke ba'elam, to your lot in this world, and ultimately have an impact in the entire world. It's not just I'm going to just do mitzvah here and there, randomly learn a little Torah, I'm bringing light into my life, and my neshama is connected with Eir Hashem. No, there's a system, and the system has to be obeyed and applied by and completely move along with precision with that exact system established by Hashem himself. Tefillin we put on every day, Kriya Shema twice a day, and so on and so forth. And exactly the right time. There's a Zman Krishma, there's Zman Tefillin, and so on and so forth. And if I didn't do it, so I wasn't mamshich that area, I didn't draw that light into my neshama. The fact that I'm going to begin from now on and truly do a true tshuva, begin from then now on to say Krishma as an example, to use the lashon of the Chazal, someone who misses out of Krishma, he cannot correct it. Even I start doing Krishma today in the right time forever, but nonetheless, what happened to that oir, that light which needed to come into my neshama, and so on? It is missing, it is lacking. As such, there's a cavity which was not filled with that oir, which was meant to come through that Kriya Shema. Which basically the Alter Rebbe is saying that there's two dimensions to every sin. In this case, mitzvah saseh. There's one, I rebelled in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hashem says, do that, and I was lax, and I said, no, I want to sleep, or whatever it is. That's a rebelliousness. That's expression of rebellion into the King of all kings, Hashem, Rahman al-Itzlan. How careful would it be? Well, how would a person be with a regular king? And we're talking about even a proper king and a proper setup. A king is a king, and one dares to violate the dictate of a king. And you're talking about, again, a healthy dictate. We're not talking about a tyranny government or a tyrant. We're talking about a king which established a certain edict. We follow. Again, namely in the context of Yiddishkeit, it doesn't interfere with in Yiddishkeit. The king asks you to do something, you do it. The king of all kings asked you to do something, yeah, you do it. And he's right there, like the famous expression, he's standing right over you and he's telling you to do it. What do you mean you were just complacent, cavalier to the whole submission, which is meant to be expressed at that very moment to the Melech Malchei Amlachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the King of all kings. So that part, Hashem is ready to atone right away for you. With his great kindness, he established, if it's a mitzvah saseh, I'm atoning for you right away. But the other dimension of the mitzvah, which is the idea of this Eir Hashem, is the Eir which is inherent within the mitzvah, in the mitzvah itself. And this mitzvah, the light had to come down and attach and connect to your neshama. and fill in a certain part which was missing at that moment, which needed to be nimshach, needed to be drawn, and complete your neshama at that time. And again, via your neshama out of the bechelke be'elam into your lot, your birurim, meaning to say this was placed upon you, this was placed upon you to elevate and sublimate within your lot in Elam Haza and ultimately have an impact on the entire Elam Haza, which every mitzvah does. Famous expression, incredible Lashenis expression, famous Alter Rebbe with Kunter Sachin, and talking about tefillin in one particular mitzvah has an impact in the entire world. What happened with that ayr? Nothing. It just didn't come down. So I'm going to do tshuva, and I'm going to start, in other words, within my tshuva process, I'm going to start doing it every single day. From now on, true tshuva, which is namely about dropping the sin. And we mentioned Alter Rebbe being so explicit. This is what tshuva is: stop sinning. And in this case, mitzvah say, be careful from now on. Okay, I'm going to be careful from now on. My tshuva is going to be a proper tshuva on all levels, but namely as it manifests in action. And in this case, reciting the Shema in its right time forever. But what happened to that ayr? There remained a cavity in your neshama which was not filled in. So what are you going to do about it? The fact that you say to that Tuesday, the following day, it doesn't do anything to the day before. And so too in every single mitzvah. When it comes to learning Torah, I had an opportunity to learn Torah, and I didn't utilize that opportunity. Okay, I see and I regret and I do tshuva, and Hashem accepts my tshuva in the context of my rebellion towards Melech Malcham Malcham Baruch, towards Him, the King of all kings. He's ready to accept right away. And how was my tshuva primarily expressed in Kabbalah of Lachlata Teva, my resolute acceptance that I'm not going to be mevatel any more opportunities, which means I'm going to utilize every moment that Hashem gave me to learn Torah, that I'm going to learn Torah. Granted, and it's wonderful, and it's accepted on high. But what happened to those 10 minutes that you could have learned? There is the fact that you're learning the next day doesn't. That's already dai lashon in Torah, in Gemara. The lashon in Nigla is dai lafkia satzmai. Those 10 minutes on the next Tuesday need to be filled with limud Torah, and you're doing it. You're doing it properly because you established a healthy tshuva. In other words, in your system, you did true, real tshuva, which is again, namely about zivas achet, leaving sin, and you're resolute that from now on, every opportunity you have to learn Torah, you're going to learn Torah. But that's for the day that you need to learn Torah. A certain ayr has to come down on that Tuesday and the next one, and then the day after, and the day after, and the day after. Those 10 minutes that you didn't learn Torah, that Monday, how can you expect something should come down and that ayr should fill in that cavity, but it just wasn't there? You can't establish something which did not exist. And therefore there's an issue. And that's what the Gemara says, Ein yochel liskin. You cannot correct. And that's why mitzvahs say will always override a mitzvahs leises, even though categorically there's a gravity in the mitzvahs leises that you have to wait till Yom Kippur. It should be completely clean, as we explained there again in the first chapter. So Rahman al what happens when the person has all these cavities? Based on the system established by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You didn't do the mitzvah. You can't expect, if someone chas v'shalom tainted a soul, you ask Hashem, could you clean up my soul? We explained that as well, which is again part of the wording of the Anshei Knesset Agdela as part of davening. We ask Hashem even to do it in an enormous rather benevolent way, even beyond the system. We spoke about that as well. Okay, and we're working and we're beseeching Hashem, please clean that stain, which was established because of my misbehaving. And it's not so simple. You have to wait till Yom Kippur. It's pending till Yom Kippur. Leisasa is categorically a more grave sin, more of a grave sin, the mitzvah say, based on what you just learned. There's leisaz mishamat shemeichel like. But there's an issue which you have a mitzvah say, which you don't have a mitzvah leisasa. which is again the air which you were meant to be mamshich, this light that you needed to draw from on high, is actually missing. You cannot create something from something which does not actually exist. So there's an issue. So what do we do about it? So the Gemara says, "Ein yachol lisken." You cannot be misakin. How can you? Comes the Alter Rebbe, and again, it's not saying different than the Gemara. The Alter Rebbe begins the whole chapter. Again, we're not going to go into the whole chapter. It's a lengthy chapter, very sadistic, which means a very fundamental chapter, in which explains the system of HaKadosh Baruch Hu within the whole package of Torah mitzvahs. Now, there's a system which is a limit, and there's a certain hagbala, which means just like you can't. A tefillin has its size. A sukkah has. I'm just going to put up a sukkah. It's higher than 20. It's fine. It's a sukkah. I commemorate. The sukkah is a shaft is b'nei Yisrael that Hashem surrounded Am Yisrael. Then, if it's the Nani Akavi, the clouds of glory, or the sukkahs which Hashem erected for the entire Am Yisrael and the Midbar, and we celebrate it. I'm celebrating it this year. I'm going into that sukkah, even if it's uncomfortable. I'm going in anyways. It's Da'ir Patim in a sukkah, but again, whatever it takes, meaning that every effort, and I'm going to eat everything in the sukkah, so it's a little higher than 20 amas. It's okay, it's fine. No, it's not fine. Hashem established in His Torah a system of Torah mitzvahs. It seems limited from our perspective and our point of view, but it's not just a limitation like the limitation of a nivra, the limitation of a created being, which is by definition mortal and limited, and everything about the human being is a confined entity. We're talking about the Hagbala of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which in terminology of Chikira and Kabbalah, it's Hagbala Atzmis. For whatever reason, Hashem says it ought to be exactly like that. This measurement, this size, if it's a mezuzah, if it's tefillin, if it's a mikveh, everything has its measurement. And again, it's a measurement associated with the deepest dimension within HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We're not going to go into it now. There's a system, and so too, and Hashem says, yeah, you didn't do it, and you cannot correct it. This is part of the system because you did not draw that air. What are you going to do about it? Can't do anything about it. I did not say Krishma on that day. Hence, Ein Yachol Lisken. Move forward. Do it better tomorrow, but there's always a cavity. Comes the Alter Rebbe and says, yeah, that's part of the system, and Hashem established a whole. Again, this is part of the gift of tshuva. Tshuva is a different phenomenon. Even tshuva is also a mitzvah, one of the 613 mitzvahs, but it has its unique energy, which is not compared. You cannot compare to any other mitzvah. It has a certain depth. It has a certain koyach. It has an ability to revolutionize the whole relationship of a Yid with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And in this context, it has the ability to unleash a reservoir, resources from this innate, inherent, and deep reservoir which exists within every neshama in its unique relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to draw a new flow of light, which that flow will ultimately fill in, will have the ability to fill in all those cavities. And more so, if you want to connect to it, it speaks about the cavities, in other words, which are not filled in regarding mitzvahs saseh. But if you think about it, it also takes care of the mitzvahs leises as well. The famous chapter in Likutei Amorim, we actually learned it, it's a click away, in Zion. The Peirik Zion, Likutei Amorim, the first segment, has the ability, if the tshuva is truly done, that every tshuva, the tshuva is proper, it's a proper tshuva, or a tshuva coming from the deepest resources of the heart, and is expressed in that very fashion, in that very way, has the ability to transform even the sins, even the advertent sins, not only to shgogis as inadvertent sins, but even to zachis as merits. The whole subject of tshuva, which is enormous on its own. And here the Alter Rebbe introduces this as something very special. A Yid opens up the Eimek, two levels of Eimek, based on the deeper resources. Again, the two levels of the inner workings of his neshama. Chai Yichida is explained in a number of places of Chassidus. He unleashes a certain koyach, which that has the ability to even fill in all those cavities. And ultimately, again, in the context of Leises, he doesn't mention it there so much, But the idea also has the ability to transform even advertent sins into merits. This is enormous. That's the koach of tshuva. But Alter Rebbe says that itself is meant to be put into practice in the context of tzedakah. Again, there is more to it. Look in the chapter Yud, Be'ez Hashem, we look forward to getting to it. But basically, the Alter Rebbe says there's one mitzvah which truly doesn't have any measurement. What mitzvah is that doesn't have any measurement at all? That is the mitzvah of tzedakah. And again, go into it, and he says that if you want to execute mitzvah of tshuva in action, is through giving tzedakah. How do we know? Because tzedakah is called kefer nafshe, kapara for one's nefesh. And there the Alter Rebbe explains that tzedakah, different than any other mitzvah, a person can give without any limitation. Meaning to say, when it comes to a lulav and I can't get the biggest lulav, or a lulav, it's not going to help me, it doesn't make any difference. Or sometimes if it's a big sukkah higher than 20 amas, you're possibly willing to say disqualified the sukkah. Nothing's going to help if I'm going to put on tefillin 10 times a day as opposed to once. I'm not supposed to have 2 mezuzahs on my door and so on. But when it comes to tzedakah, koila she'itin lish bad nafshe, a person could give everything to be mesakin his chet, to atone for the sin. Again, Alter Rebbe connects the mitzvah of tshuva, the actual dimension, or the dimension, the way it's expressed in actuality, aligned with the mamakim krasich Hashem, calling upon HaKadosh Baruch Hu from the deepest resources of my nefesh, and again, the way it's manifest, begashmis, through unleashing also, in other words, the giving limitlessly. Tzedakah, charity, again, to see the connection, it's all predicated on that pasuk. Tzedakah is kefer nafshe, and basically the Alter Rebbe points out, yes, it's not a contradiction to this, what it says, that one has to be careful how much tzedakah he's going to give, because, yes, there is the 10%, and there's the chaimish, and the 20%, we're learning recently as well, after 20%, a person has to be careful. Not easy to give more than a chaimish 20%, but that's from the perspective of tzedakah. Then there's another dimension within tzedakah, the mitzvah of tzedakah, that is, yet another dimension of tzedakah, it's kaparas nafshe. We mentioned this in the past, it's the atonement of the soul, and again, we mentioned this is the message, actually, in the end of Gimel. That's why he says, Kol ha'charedim l'dvar Hashem, those who are God-fearing Yidden would give tzedakah without any limit, based on this idea that tzedakah is kaparas nafshe, and what would someone do for refuas haguf to cure his body? There wouldn't be amount of money and saying, you know what, I cannot give more than this amount, and the doctor says, no, this procedure is going to take all your money. If you own $50,000, this is what it is. If not, unfortunately, in a few weeks, you wouldn't have the results that you'd like. Rachmana litzlan and Rachmana litzlan. There would be catastrophic results. Every healthy human being says, take all my money, as long as I should have this refuas haguf to be able to cure my body. We'll have a happen afterwards, but at least I'm alive to enjoy my money, to enjoy whatever I'll be able to get my hands on to enjoy. Alter Rebbe says how much more so when it comes to kaparas hanefesh. There's no limit how much a healthy thinker with a healthy approach would give in order to atone for his nefesh, for the illness which was caused through his iniquities and sins and transgression towards his nefesh. A person would give everything, as literally everything, without any limitation. Comes the Alter Rebbe, and this is basically the message of Perek Yud Aleph. And Alter Rebbe alludes this over here. This is the end, if you look at last week's class, the message over here in the end of Perek Gimel, that for the days you can't fast, you should give tzedakah, and how much tzedakah, there's no limit how much tzedakah you would give, because you're talking about the dimension of tzedakah, which is about tikkun hanefesh. Comes the Alter Rebbe here and says, Chazdei, he puts it into the word so beautifully and eloquently, Chazdei Hashem kilei samnu. He seeks kilei samnu, not only referring to the chesed of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he's kilei samnu, because we are not complete. We are einonu tmimim. Lei samnu means we are not complete. There's many cavities, unfortunately, which exist within the Yid's Aveda, which means his lack of Avedas Hashem, even though he's a Frum Yid. But here a mitzvah say, here an opportunity to learn Torah, which was not seriously taken in consideration. And here, a Kriya Shema, Rachmana litzlan, if it's the Reises or the Rabbanans, there are cavities. and the Leises is a separate subject. But because, namely, the Alter Rebbe's verse, the Pasuk is telling us, the Navi is telling us, Kilei Samnu, because we can't just do the regular chesed. Alter Rebbe writes, there's two levels of chesed. There's the chesed, the regular chesed, called chesed of Seder Ishtalshalus, the regular chesed, which is, even with tzedakah, like the Alter Rebbe writes, Lashon chesed Hashem, Elam Vadelam Hashem, you can give tzedakah, you are benevolent one to each other, or generally people are kind one to each other, generous one to each other. That causes Hashem's chesed to reciprocate, the chesed of Seder Ishtalshalus, the normal course of chesed, to come and to connect with every world, and with this individual in particular, the one who extends chesed, to a world which is acting in kindness one to each other, one human being to another, and so on. But that's the regular chesed. Then there's the chesed Hashem, the chesed blikvul, the infinite chesed of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the infinite kindness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, known in Kabbalah Chassidus l'mayla miseder ishtalshalus, beyond the regular interaction with Hashem, with the worlds, again known as called the Seder, the order of the, literally Shtalshalus means kind of the chain, the order, the orderly order, if you will, of Hashem's, the way Hashem established his relationship with Elam is known again as the Seder Shtalshalus, starting from the Midas, the way the primordial Midas, which is Atzilus, in the context of Elam, as we spoke about this many times, but then there's higher than Seder Shtalshalus, the inner, infinite kindness, or every midah for that matter of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the way it stands pre-Seder Shtalshalus. And then so too the chesed, there's the chesed blikvul of HaKadosh Baruch Hu without any limitation, because it's not really a midah, the way it's established in Elam Atzilus. We spoke about this many times, as much as Atzilus is a Olam which houses the Ein Sof. Nonetheless, there's the midas de Atzilus. A midah means measurement, one way or another. And here you're talking about the Chasdei Hashem, the infinite kindness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Beligvul, the limitless expression of Chesed of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the Pasuk, the Navi tells us, because Kilei Samnu, because we're incomplete, we cannot just do the regular Chesed. Tzedakah, 10%, 20%, even a bit more. No. We have to also act in the Chasdei Hashem, in that matter of limitless giving, limitless kindness, limitless charity, in order to misakin our nefesh, in order to fill in all the cavities, which again, we are solely responsible for the fact that there are missing this air, this light, which did not fill in these cavities, meaning to say there's an incompletion of within our neshama kilei samnu. So we can't just do the regular chesed. We have to adapt the Chasdei Hashem, the blikvul chesed of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's basically the lashon of the Alter Rebbe. That's basically the word of the Alter Rebbe, so beautifully translated again in Perek Yud Aleph. So Alter Rebbe brings it over here as well, which it fits so perfectly over here. Those days a person cannot fast. Again, you can see last week's class, just a click away, that in the end of the day, to give tzedakah. How much? Laharbis, Alter Rebbe says, ma'oid b'tzedakah, because here you're dealing with kaparas hanefesh. So we thought we'd be able to start Perek Daled, but today's class was taken based on with these few words. Of course, worth every moment to appreciate this enormous message, which is again a fundamental message within our Avodas Hashem. 2 dimensions of tzedakah, the regular tzedakah and the tzedakah similar to Chasdei Hashem. We look forward, Be'ez Hashem, to begin Perek Daled this coming week. In the meantime, have a wonderful night.